Hey everybody, happy Friday, wherever you're joining us from, whether that's a good morning or good afternoon or even a good evening. We're grateful that you could join us today. We're excited for another Friends Friday episode here with PlexTrack. And today we have a special guest, Gareth Pritchard. Gareth, thanks for joining us. We're going to be talking all about CTEM, risk management, exposure management today, especially from the lens of like service providers and how enterprises interact with service providers to accomplish those missions and the activities around it. So really excited about the conversation, especially since PlexTrack was recently put into the Magic Quadrant for exposure assessment platforms, which is a subcomponent of CTEM. But Gareth, for those that don't know you or maybe want to be reintroduced to you, just share a little bit about yourself, where you're at, and maybe your background.
Yeah, thanks, Dan, and thanks for inviting me to come along and to have a good conversation about this topic. Hi everyone, Gareth Pritchard. So I've been in cybersecurity now for 17, 18 years. It's something that I've been very passionate about for a long time. I've got quite a range of experiences across public sector. Yes, I'm a Brit, so I have a Scottish/British accent, so I've been in sort of UK civil service, and then for the first sort of half of my career, and then the second half of my career spent time in lots of commercial cybersecurity delivery areas. Normal commercial businesses, defense, and now I head up, I'm Chief Technology Officer. I head up our cybersecurity services strategy and delivery within Sapphire, and we're a UK MSSP, and so helping organizations across all regions and industries and sectors solve their cybersecurity challenges. And one of the big sort of trends and movements we've seen over the last sort of 3 or 4 years is the move away from just vulnerability detection and into exposure management, and that shift and that change being something that actually gives boards and businesses a lot more understanding of their risks. Does present its own challenges, I'm sure we'll get into, but it's definitely something that we're encouraging organizations to think about. And we're helping them on those journeys as they go through. I've got sort of a range of different sort of interests and backgrounds. Personally, I'm a big believer in the power of threat intelligence, and understanding what's out there is a big part of how you can respond appropriately. The world is full of stories every region, every week of breaches and incidents that happen, and the first impact is often the business, not the technical impact. Is often the thing that comes out afterwards through the research and through the analysis of incidents. But it's that business impact and those everyday life pieces of technology that impact your booking flights or going and get your groceries or whatever. And that's the thing that businesses have to secure.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, and it leads, perfectly into the topic. I mean, like I think when we were prepping for this, we kind of highlighted that you and I have been in the space for quite a while. And, I think that the industry has finally kind of come to the realization that, like what I used to always say is like, at some point you actually have to get the work done, right?
Yeah.
And we've been, I would say as an industry, we've been addicted to getting the identification of all the issues and having like point solutions to identify the threats and identify the vulnerabilities and highlight what's wrong, and all good and valuable information, right? But at the end of the day, and this was where I started my career in vulnerability management, and I thought that we might have had solved this, because I kind of left and went into pen testing and then kind of found my way back. So like, I think for just to kind of lay the groundwork or the foundation, exposure management is kind of like a term that has been identified to help kind of put a bow or put some definition around what we're actually talking about. And that really means like, hey, you have the ability to identify the issues, but then how do you actually mobilize the people and track the issues to completion and truly be able to highlight who's doing what and where your true risks actually are, so that you can actually go fix them, right? Is that kind of how you would define it?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think cybersecurity is not about how many vulnerabilities you can list. It's about how you actually fix those issues and provide proactive defense, right? As businesses evolve, if you take the threats to one side for a second, as businesses evolve, their environments are changing all the time, whether they're buying new businesses or rolling out new services or transitioning from on-premise to cloud infrastructure, embracing AI. I'm sure that's the first mention. I'll have a ticker in the top right of the podcast for it. But, I think the businesses are changing all the time, and the landscape is changing in terms of how a business operates. And understanding that is a big part of the picture. The penetration testing, we deliver penetration testing. It's an incredibly valuable tool within a vulnerability management program. But if a business doesn't understand what function or what business process a particular vulnerability is linked to or associated with, it becomes a whack-a-mole problem. It becomes just we've got a big list and we measure based on the size of the list, and is a bigger list better or worse? It's not, just because you've got more vulnerabilities might mean your detections are great.
Yeah,
it might be more or less secure than someone who doesn't have a great detection but has a small number of vulnerabilities. So really understanding that problem and then linking it through to the business function. Cybersecurity isn't just an IT and cyber team problem. It's a business function. It's an operations team. It's a business risk. It's a board risk. And CTEM as a framework, we love an acronym in our industry.
Yeah,
it's a framework at the end of the day. It's a concept. It's not a thing. You can't buy a CTEM, Omatic, and it'd be perfect and solve your world, right? It's a framework about bringing together business risk, technical risk, and having a plan to fix that, and having that in line with your business priorities.
Yeah, and I think that it's important because then as a service provider, and this was something that I always experienced is like, and kind of like where this all stemmed from my perspective, like we'd be doing penetration testing and we'd come back a year later and basically rewrite the same report, right? And okay, you're paying us money to like help I highlight these issues. Are you actually trying to fix them, or do you want to fix them? And I think there's a myriad of reasons why they may not be getting fixed, right? But at the end of the day, it's still not happening. And so exposure management, CTEM, it starts to put some framework around that. And so as a service provider, I think it helps communicate and become more of a partner in not just the, hey, we're going to tell you what's wrong, but actually, you tell me what your experience has been, but I think that where it's going is to actually be able to help in the remediation.
Yeah, I've been in and around pen testing for 10, 15 years, a long time, and that evolves. There's different sort of priorities and focuses as technology evolves, as cloud happened. The techniques we used sort of evolved alongside it. I actually speak to a lot of pen testers who actually are quite downhearted when they do go. It's bad from the customer's perspective that they've had a report that's the same vulnerabilities year on year. It's actually bad from the delivery consultant's perspective as well, because they're like, what's the point of this? Everyone's just going through the motions. Everyone's just creating the sausage machine has happened. We've created the sausages and right, it's the same recipe as it was last time. And fundamentally, security professionals, and we are all security professionals. We also are all members of the public. And services that we consume as members of the public are our customers' products and services and businesses. And so I care about, in the UK, with our National Health Service, I care because my family and friends and I use those services. So for it to be a process that we know penetration testing is important, great. But if we don't then fix the issues and findings, we're not actually progressing as a world. And so that's one of the things that we help a lot of organizations with, is that remediation aspect, that prioritization of the findings, the stitching together of maybe a couple of different engagements that are maybe disparate to actually look for root cause. And what something like a framework like CTEM allows you to do is to take a kind of top-down business risk view and go, my critical path to run my business are these products, these services, these technologies, these parts of my environment. I might get individual one of them's pen tested. I might get individual ones, scanned on a regular basis as a heartbeat. how do I stitch those together to go, well, what if something broke that would cause an issue? What if I had, a ransomware gang look for a 0-day against a piece of technology that I use that's in my process? If I don't have that kind of scenario planning of the what if, then you're constantly chasing all right, well, we've done a scan, or we've done a pen test, or we've done a vulnerability scan, and we found issues with the tech stack that's there. Okay, we'll patch it. Okay, but are you actually, are you monitoring the right things? Are you looking at the developers that are developing those products and thinking, how do we do this more securely through the development cycle? So, a common example I use for that is quite often pen testing happens at the end of a development cycle or a release cycle. Vulnerability management is a sort of a heartbeat within that. But actually, when you're developing as a developer, you're developing use cases for whatever function you're doing. Are you developing the abuse cases for that use case? Because if you're thinking about how a malicious actor could be abusing a authentication flow or a basket process, then that will help you to think about coding in the security best practice. And it goes back to the whole something like exposure management, is understand what your exposure is, understand what's critical to your business, and then putting in place mechanisms to improve it. And so our remediation sort of folks really focus on helping the client to get that translation from the technical findings, the numbers of vulnerabilities we see, into real developer or actionable improvement activities that can happen to build up that resilience.
Yeah, and I think that in addition to and I think with the value of having a partner, right? Because I think that as an enterprise, some people either think like, okay, well, we're going to hire a team and do this all ourselves, or they're like, hey, we're not going to really have a team and we're going to outsource it all through like an MSSP. And I think that that is an option, but I would be curious if you've seen more success, at least for those that can afford it. I mean, maturity and budget all come into play here, but having a partner that is like almost like a hybrid, where you can actually help, say, hey, we want you to continue to help us focus on this, as well as maybe identify recurring themes, right? Because I think there's the notion of, hey, like first step is actually fixing the issues that were identified. Then the next step is, like you mentioned, monitoring for them for recurrence, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you're right. There's a spectrum here based on size, scale, complexity. If you're a big financial services organization that have hundreds of developers and tens of millions of dollars worth of security budget, then sure, you might be able to build a team internally. I think hybrid works really well for a lot of organizations, either hybrid on a per project basis. So you might do trial projects first with a development team or a part of your business, or a longer, more defined hybrid model. And I think what works well there is the customer knows their business. That's their expertise. Security delivery providers know security, and those working in harmony together means that you don't have a challenge of the customer side having to find security expertise. Now the other thing that it allows you to do is to upskill and do that knowledge transfer piece. Mm-hmm. I'm a big believer in how do we raise the tide of knowledge of how techniques work, and a lot of the tooling that has been open sourced over the last 25 years is about making security more accessible for more people to do it more regularly. That's why open source is a good thing in security. But I think knowledge and then the applicability of those tools or techniques or threats or risks works really well in a hybrid model, because you're not trying to take the development away from the development teams, because that's what they're there for do and they can react quickly. But it's to be able to inject that security knowledge, or even just having the firing ideas off each other. Hey, what do you think about this? What would happen if I did that? And then having that within that sort of hybrid deployment can be really powerful, actually.
Yeah, and one thing that I just remember it really helped me as a professional on the consulting side is you get exposure to a lot of different organizations, a lot of different engagements, so you can use that expertise and knowledge to help on your consulting engagements. And so I think that the value of a hybrid model, like we said, is that you're not only getting the service of like what you're paying for, but you're also getting the breadth of expertise in terms of, hey, we've seen this in other organizations. So you have that kind of ability to, quasi benchmark yourselves, right? So that, you're not living in a vacuum or too myopic on your own, thoughts or solutions, right?
Yeah, and I think that there's a thing we haven't really discussed yet that really makes that tick, is if there's trust between the two sides of that coin, right?
Sure.
So if the development team or the security team trust the service provider, and you can demonstrate those advantages, it works really well. When it can break down is if it's a kind of them and us thing, where it's they're just coming in to tell me my baby's ugly, and it's like, no, we really care about making the baby more secure. It's a terrible analogy. But I think for me, it's working in that manner allows the customer to focus on their piece of their priorities as much as possible whilst being secure. But I think you then, to make it not just be a conveyor belt of having to do this over and over again in the same manner, you need to have those leave behinds, those knowledge sharings, those upskillings, so that you can then apply those lessons learned in other places. Because consultancy or any partnership is an investment, right? You have to understand what the costs are. And certain businesses might not want to do it every single time. They might want to do it at start and then build a champions network or something that allows it to permeate through wider teams. But that's where, if we go back to kind of the topic at hand, if you look at a lot of the reading and discussions around exposure management, there's the CTEM phrase as an acronym is continuous, and that's a key point. We talked about point in time pen testing right at the start. So continuous means you don't have to pen test every single minute of every single day, but you've got to have an understanding of the risk in your environment and how it changes over time.
Yeah. And
exposure is, well, how sensitive information or sensitive data that I have, or sensitive identities that I have, whatever is sensitive, what attack surface does that present to someone wanting to do me ill? And I think as we adopt different technologies, I think in a traditional application that has a user profile and has a login page and has customer information or whatever, I think that's relatively well understood, that there is a user and there is maybe a support team and there is a functional org structure around that. Where I think people are potentially going to play with those concepts is things like agentic AI, because we're going to give identities to technology, which we assume a lot of our security is based on a human doing a certain set of actions or a human doing a certain set of things. And I think what we find that it's important to have customers and people think about is, as you embrace technology, cyber security should be the brakes on a car. Brakes aren't there to stop you. The brakes are there to give you control as you move throughout the world, right? There's risk in everything we do. Brakes on a car are there to give you that control back, rather than stopping you doing business. Because if you drive around with the handbrake on, you're gonna break things, and it's not helpful. So I think thinking about it from a managed risk, controlled risk perspective is really helpful for that board level conversation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, when I was a security director, I would always try to tell the organization, like, hey, we're not the office of no, we're the office of maybe, or like, let's figure it out. What's the best way to do this in the safest manner? Because the business still has to run and operate, or whatever the function of the organization is, it still has to do its job. And, your job as the security team is to just identify, like, hey, what are the risks and how we manage those, right? So if you were to give some advice to folks that are kind of, they've been trying, for all intents and purposes, they've been trying to do this for a long time in terms of exposure management. It's now kind of become more of the forefront of the discussion, which I think is great. It's like, hey, we're actually helping people solve the right problems. And that's like what the mission of PlexTrack has always been. It's like, hey, we're trying to help people identify what the most important things are to fix and go fix those first, right? But like, how would you recommend people kind of get started? And what are some key tips that you've seen, work in some of the engagements that you've been involved in?
Yeah, so I think understanding what you have is a good place to if you've got visibility, that visibility is a good place to start to understand what you're then securing. So that's a pretty open topic. Understanding what you have in traditional IT, in OT environments, in cloud, it's all going to be dependent on your business. But understanding what you have is a good place to start, and then connecting what you have to how your business operates. So if we leverage a lot of threat modeling techniques. So understanding what are those critical pathways for your business. Now, an application server or system that supports the lunch menu, not very important, not very exciting, but one that supports your main kind of revenue generating process, or holds the customer data that you have, or as part of your regulated environment, that is that's the important piece. So then taking what you have and then threat modeling what potentially is at risk there and what that attack surface looks like, that then gives you at least a starter for 10 on what your prioritized lists are. I think people can often get into a kind of compliance loop where we do ISO compliance or we do some other regulated compliance. Those compliance things should be measurements of existing behavior rather than doing things to just pass an audit. And so the audits are a lot easier when you've got those sort of foundational principles in place. And actually, if you look at a lot of those regulations and a lot of those frameworks that exist, they talk about knowing what you have, knowing where it is, knowing who's responsible for it, and knowing what happens when things go wrong, because the things go wrong will happen, and regulations are changing all the time. So I think observability is a big piece, and then understanding what the threats are on those allow you to start the basis of your program.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's good stuff, and I think that. Just the notion of starting somewhere is and so like understanding, hey, these are the steps we can take, because again that continuous notion, it implies like, hey, this is long term. There's no silver bullet. There's no hey, once we do this we're good to go. It's like getting into those rituals and those habits and like what we call that hygiene of being more proactive. And I think these are all the concepts that we've been preaching for years, and it finally, I think, has come to this, this head of like, okay, yeah, this is actually what you need to do. And so like the notion of like starting somewhere, getting into a continuous frame of mind paradigm, as we would say, and then just continuing to do that on a regular basis, and recognizing like, hey, that we're going to test frequently, we're going to be proactive, and yeah.
Sorry to cut in. I think the other thing to just think about is I've seen a number of organizations go into kind of traditional compute, so laptops, phones, cloud compute, servers, et cetera. Where we see the world evolving is to kind of the value of identity and identity within a business, and thinking about how you secure identity. So there's lots of frameworks out there, zero trust and everything else, but they all work on a principle of having knowledge of what a user has privilege to do, and securing that identity. And I kind of reiterate the point around when you're doing those sorts of assets and doing those sorts of what do I have, thinking about what does a user have access to, not just what a human has access to, but what does a service account, what does a AI identity have, what are the machine accounts and machine identities that you have as well, because quite a lot of the exposures and breaches that we're seeing now over the last 6 to 12 months are really compromising the identity within a business, rather than necessarily popping some ODE on a piece of technology. Right. Those still exist. But people are, the phrase I've heard a number of times now is people aren't hacking in, they're logging in. So as you're thinking about exposures, thinking about how you manage and monitor and protect identity within your business, because that commodity is really important for both your own employees, but also your customers as they interact with you. And I think if you can answer the question of How do we know if an identified user was compromised? How would I identify a malicious insider? All of those types of questions, they will start to uncover some of these challenges. When a lot of the problems that I've seen failed sort of VM programs is it talks a lot about, zeros and ones and numbers of CVEs we have on technical things.
Yeah. All that. Well, and I mean, I think it's like, when you kind of put yourself in the attacker's mindset, like, as a pen tester, it's like, hey, if I couldn't find a vulnerability related specifically to technology, like, okay, if they're running this unpatched version of Apache and I have an exploit for that, and that can give me the foothold. But like, well, even if they did that, right, they still are going to do the common attack path scenarios of like, okay, well, who has access to this box that I can now gain access to their credentials to then go pivot and move laterally. So it all does come down. Yeah, you're exactly right. That's really good to highlight. It all does generally is always going to come down to the privileges of the users and the accounts that exist. So focusing on identity and access controls, again, pretty foundational and fundamental security concepts that just can continue to keep coming to light, right?
Yeah, and I think look, the tooling that's out there is incredible. There's more tooling now in cybersecurity than there has ever been. There's a startup for everything. There's a disruptor for everything. There's established players for everything. Yep. So you'll never be short of a tool in cyber to solve the problem. Whether they all solve all the problems they all say they do is a different podcast. But there is always going to be a product or system out there. But everything is about balance, right? Everyone has a finite budget that you've got to balance and a return on that. So understanding what your existing tooling has. Tooling will help you with the scale problem. So, the volume of identities, the volume of assets, the volume of things. Tools are very good at taking volume and giving you signal from noise. The applicability into your business is that what's the business impact? What's the exposure impact to my business processes or my functions? So, this is a tooling part of the solution, but you can't buy a tool to solve this problem. It's a tool to feed into a business decision-making process, which is why, I both like the fact that CTEM is a branded thing, a framework thing that has also, I think by giving it an acronym name, we're missing the sort of so what to the board. And the so what to the board is this is about managing your business exposure. Just as your brand is an exposure from someone, giving you some slanderous commentary about your company or something, cyber exposure is similar in that regard. It's an impact to your business.
No, that's great insight well, hey, I think we could talk for a long time, and I'm sure we'll do another episode here in the future because just lots of things to talk about and enjoy having you on. But really appreciate taking time today. Hopefully, hopefully you'll come back and we can talk more. But also appreciate just taking time out of your busy schedule. I know we're all busy. Thanks to everybody else for joining us. Gareth, what are some ways people can find you or things that you're working on? Just like, feel free to promote that.
Perfect. So we're our website, sapphire.net, is a really good place to see, our services. Feel free to connect to me on LinkedIn. We've got a couple of sort of blog posts and things that we're going to put out as well that are useful in some of this space. We really kind of happy to help. Feel free to reach out to me or anyone in my team, and we'll happily have a conversation about how we can help.
Great, awesome. Well, hey, thanks again, and look forward to I guess Black Hat Europe's coming up, and so your team's going to be there as well. So maybe some of the team can people can find them, but we're all excited to enter into the holiday season and all that. So. Appreciate everyone taking time out of your busy Fridays to join us. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to throw them into the chat, and we will address them shortly. But other than that, really appreciate your time, and have a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend. We will catch you next time.